In Luke chapter 3, we see John the Baptist all grown up and preparing the way for the Messiah. We also see the baptism and genealogy of Jesus. Matthew's Gospel also has a genealogy for Jesus, but with different names listed, due to Luke's different emphases than Matthew. Also, Luke's genealogy traces all the way from Adam, whom he calls the Son of God. In chapter 4, Jesus is tested in the wilderness and tempted by the devil for 40 days as a symbol of Israel's 40 years of testing in the desert. But Jesus doesn't give in to the temptation like Israel did. He is the true Israelite. Jesus later goes to his hometown of Nazareth and preaches in the synagogue from the book of Isaiah, claiming that Isaiah was talking about him when he said one would come who would proclaim freedom for the captives, the poor, and the oppressed. The Nazarenes love his sermon, but then Jesus makes offensive statements at the end. He compares himself to the prophets Elijah and Elisha, but in his comparison he points out how Elijah helped a foreign woman, and how Elisha not only healed a foreigner, but one who was the commander of the enemy army. The Nazarenes were angry because Jesus claimed that Israel's God wanted to rescue Israel's enemies. The Nazarenes try to throw Jesus off a cliff, but he escapes. It's ironic that in the story prior to this one, the devil tempts Jesus to throw himself off a cliff to prove God's protection over him. Later, Luke tells us that Jesus drives out an evil spirit from a person and that he heals many other people. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus calls his first disciples. Jesus was preaching near the lake of Gennesaret, or the Sea of Galilee, when he saw two boats at the water's edge. Boarding the one belonging to Simon, or Peter, he sat and taught the people from the boat. Afterwards, he told Peter to let down his nets again, even though they had been fishing all night and caught nothing. Peter obeys, and suddenly the nets are so filled with fish that they start to break. When Peter saw the large catch, which filled both boats almost to the sinking point, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Jesus responded, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will catch men." After which, Peter and his partners James and John left everything and followed Jesus. Later, Jesus heals a man with leprosy, and then he forgives and heals a paralyzed man, but the religious leaders are offended by his forgiveness. Jesus then calls a tax collector named Levi to come and be his disciple, and afterwards he goes and eats with sinners, which offends the religious leaders even more. Some people ask Jesus why his disciples don't fast like John's disciples and the Pharisees do, and Jesus tells them it's a time of celebration and not appropriate to fast right now, but they will fast someday, and he begins to speak to the people in parables. In chapter 6, the religious leaders are also offended when Jesus and his disciples pick grain as they walk through the fields and eat it because they are working on the Sabbath. And Jesus reminds them that the Sabbath was made for their own benefit, not to be a slave master over them. After this, Jesus then calls all of his 12 apostles together to follow him. Luke then presents us with a sermon of Jesus in which he discusses blessings and woes. The sermon runs parallel to Matthew's Gospel and the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. Each beatitude begins with, blessed are you, who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God, etc. But then Luke adds, woe to you, who are rich, for you have already received your comfort, etc. As part of his command to love your enemies, Jesus says, do to others as you would have them do to you. He asks, how are you any different from sinners if you're only kind to those who are kind to you? And Jesus also talks about judging others, and how those who judge others will be held to the same standard they have set for everyone else. He also speaks again through parables, such as the one about a tree and its fruit, and the wise and the foolish builders.